The phone slipped from between the pages of her medical textbook when I moved it from the coffee table. A slim, black burner phone, the kind you buy with cash when you don't want to leave a trail. For a moment, I simply stared at it lying on our hardwood floor, out of place among the carefully curated objects of our life together. The contrast was jarring, this secretive device against the backdrop of our meticulously designed living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, where sailboats now caught the golden afternoon light. My name is Thomas Reynolds, 45 years old, Chief Financial Officer at Westlake Medical Group in Seattle. For 17 years, I've been married to Dr. Rebecca Reynolds, Director of Oncology Research at Norwood Memorial Hospital and one of the most respected medical minds in the Pacific Northwest. Our life together has been a portrait of upper-middle-class achievement. The modernist house in Queen and Hill, summer vacations split between the San Juan Islands and Rebecca's family's cottage in Vermont, and a marriage built on mutual respect, shared ambitions, and unwavering predictability. We didn't have children. Early in our relationship, we decided our careers would be our legacy. I picked up the phone, turning it over in my hand. This wasn't Rebecca's sleek iPhone 14 Pro that usually sat on our kitchen counter, screen perpetually lighting up with hospital notifications and texts from colleagues. This was something else entirely, something hidden. Rebecca and I had met during my MBA program at Stanford, where she was already deep into her medical residency. Our connection had been immediate, two driven, analytical minds who found in each other a respite from explaining ambition. We understood each other's dedication to career without justification or apology. Our courtship had been efficient, our wedding modest but elegant, our life together a masterclass in comfortable routine punctuated by achievements and calculated indulgences. In 17 years, I'd never once questioned her loyalty or honesty. Rebecca operated with a surgeon's precision in all aspects of life, clear intentions, direct communication, no wasted emotion. It made finding this hidden phone all the more disturbing. Rebecca didn't do secrets. She considered them inefficient. I didn't immediately turn it on. Instead, I returned to my home office, placed the phone in my desk drawer, and continued reviewing quarterly projections as if nothing had happened. Professional to the end, a trait Rebecca and I had always shared. But the numbers on my screen blurred, my mind circling back to the slim black device now locked in my drawer, pulsing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. When Rebecca returned from her hospital shift that evening, I said nothing about the phone. I watched her instead, searching for signs of the stranger who might keep secrets from her husband of 17 years. She moved through our kitchen with practiced efficiency, her dark hair, now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, pulled back in a loose ponytail. The faint lines around her eyes had deepened over the years but only enhanced her quiet authority. She poured a glass of Cabernet from the wine fridge, the same ritual she'd maintained since her residency days. Finally got approval for the clinical trial, she announced, leaning against our white quartz countertop. 3 years of proposals and the board finally understood what we've been trying to tell them. Congratulations, I replied, genuinely pleased for her despite the question mark now hovering over our marriage. The clinical trial had been her obsession for years, an experimental treatment protocol for advanced pancreatic cancer that conventional medical wisdom considered too aggressive. When do you start recruitment? 2 weeks. We're already identifying potential candidates. Her eyes lit up with the passion that had first attracted me to her, that fierce intelligence that bordered on intensity. I studied her face, looking for any flicker of duplicity, any indication that this woman maintained a secret life separate from the one we'd built together. There was nothing but the familiar focus, perhaps a shade more fatigue around her eyes than usual. Rough day otherwise? I asked, closing my laptop. "Lost a patient this afternoon," she replied, her voice carrying that clinical detachment she'd perfected over years of delivering difficult news. 38 years old. 2 kids. Advanced metastatic disease that should have been caught 3 years ago. But she didn't have insurance until it was too late. For just a moment, I caught a flash of something harder in her expression. Anger, perhaps, or frustration beyond the professional disappointment she usually allowed herself to express. I nodded, knowing better than to offer platitudes. Rebecca didn't share these moments for comfort, but as a ritual of acknowledgement. In 17 years of marriage to a doctor, I'd learned when to listen and when to simply witness. "How was your day?" she asked, returning to her usual composed self. "Budget meetings for the new urgent care facilities," I replied. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." After dinner, Rebecca retreated to her study to review patient files, another routine as familiar as the orbit of planets. When the house grew quiet, I retrieved the phone from my drawer. It was password protected, 6 digits standing between me and whatever secret life my wife was leading. I tried her birthday, our anniversary, the day she received her medical license. Nothing. The familiar twist of suspicion tightened in my chest. Why would my wife need a secret phone? I slept poorly, the phone locked in my desk drawer, feeling like a live grenade in our otherwise orderly home. The next morning, Rebecca left before sunrise for an early surgery, the removal of a tumor wrapped around a patient's pancreatic duct. A procedure few surgeons would attempt, but that Rebecca had pioneered at Norwood. I called my assistant and cleared my schedule for the day. This wasn't a decision made in haste. Whatever was happening, I needed to understand it completely before confronting my wife. My office at Westlake Medical Group overlooked Elliott Bay, the Olympic Mountains visible on clear days like this one. 15 years ago, when I first took this position, the view had represented achievement. Now it was just familiar scenery I barely noticed as I built financial models that would determine which communities received medical services and which would go without. I spent the morning not reviewing financial statements but researching how to bypass security on a locked phone. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thomas Reynolds, the man who had implemented the strictest data security protocols at Westlake Medical Group, now learning how to hack a device. By noon, I had what I needed purchased anonymously through cryptocurrency. Back home, I connected the burner phone to my laptop and ran the software. After 43 minutes, during which I paced our living room, pausing occasionally to look at the framed photos of Rebecca and me that documented our life together, the screen unlocked, revealing the contents of my wife's secret life. The messages appeared automatically. Not romantic exchanges or flirtations, but clinical, detached communications. Patient transport secured for Thursday. Landing at 11 p.m. Terminal B. Documents processed. Identity package ready for pickup at the usual location. Funds transferred. Confirmation code. Nightingale 472. New supplier confirmed for medication. 30% less than previous channel. I scrolled through dozens of similar exchanges, spanning nearly 2 years. References to patient transfers, treatment protocols, medication acquisitions that appeared to happen outside normal supply chains, and offshore banking transactions. The final message had been sent yesterday. Subject experiencing complications. Intervention required tonight. All hands. The implications assembled themselves like pieces of a terrible puzzle. My wife, respected oncologist, pillar of the medical community, the woman whose ethical standards had once intimidated colleagues, was involved in something unauthorized. Something that required secret communications, undocumented patients, and unregistered treatments. I checked the phone's photo gallery. Just a few images. A warehouse in what appeared to be an industrial district south of downtown, aerial shots of what looked like private airfields, and screenshots of medical record systems I didn't recognize. I recognized the warehouse from the faded sign Harborview Storage, an abandoned facility near the port that had been slated for redevelopment before the project stalled during the recession. My training as a financial executive had taught me to evaluate risks dispassionately. Option 1. Confront Rebecca immediately. Risk. She denies everything, destroys evidence, ends whatever operation she's involved in without explanation. Option 2. Investigate further. Risk. Becoming complicit through knowledge. Option 3. Contact authorities. Risk. Destroying my wife's career, our marriage, potentially her freedom without understanding what I was reporting. I chose option 2, but the decision felt like betrayal itself, of Rebecca if she had good reasons for her secrecy, of my professional ethics if she didn't. That evening, Rebecca called to say she was staying late at the hospital, a complication with a transplant patient. In 17 years of marriage, I'd never questioned these calls. Tonight, I wondered if there had ever been a transplant patient at all. I understand. Take care of your patient, I said, my voice betraying nothing of my inner turmoil. I'll be home late. Don't wait up, she replied, the same words she'd used countless times before. I waited 30 minutes after her call, then drove to Harborview Storage. The industrial district was deserted at night, the warehouses standing like abandoned sentinels against the Seattle skyline. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in shadows, feeling ridiculous and terrified simultaneously, a 45-year-old financial executive playing detective. The main entrance was chained shut, but a side door showed signs of recent use. The lock was new, incongruous against the weathered metal door. I hesitated, then tried the handle. It opened. Inside, the vast space was mostly empty except for a section at the back, separated by temporary walls that hadn't been visible in the phone's photos. Light leaked from beneath the door. I moved silently across the concrete floor, years of financial audits never preparing me for this moment of physical intrusion into what was clearly an unauthorized facility. Voices drifted from behind the temporary wall. One was Rebecca's, her tone urgent but controlled, the same voice she used in medical emergencies when I'd observed her at hospital functions. We're losing her blood pressure. Get another unit of O negative. We don't have another unit, a male voice responded. The supplier couldn't deliver until tomorrow. That's not acceptable. Call Eric. He needs to divert from Swedish hospital. Use Protocol 7. Tell him it's my authorization. Rebecca, that's pushing it. We've already pulled 3 units this month. And we've saved 7 lives with those units. Make the call, Jason. Jason. I recognized the name from hospital fundraisers, Jason Chin, a brilliant trauma surgeon who had left Norwood 2 years ago under circumstances that had seemed vague even at the time. Rebecca had mentioned his departure with uncharacteristic brevity. I peered through a gap in the partition. What I saw changed everything I thought I understood about my wife and our life together. The space had been converted into a makeshift operating room, not some back alley setup but a sophisticated medical facility that would have passed inspection if not for its location. Medical equipment, some bearing Norwood Memorial asset tags, some clearly new, surrounded a surgical table. On it lay a young woman, maybe 20 years old, her skin ashen. Rebecca stood over her, surgical mask in place, completely focused. Jason Chan and a woman I didn't recognize worked alongside her, their movements precise despite the unusual setting. She's stabilizing, the unknown woman said, monitoring equipment that looked more advanced than what I'd seen during my last hospital tour. Temps coming back up. Good, Rebecca replied. Let's get the central line in and start the protocol. This is our only chance to reverse the rejection. Rejection. A transplant complication. So Rebecca hadn't lied about that part. Just about where she was treating the patient and under what authority. I stepped back, mind racing. This was no affair, no simple betrayal. My wife was running an unauthorized medical facility, treating patients off the record, potentially diverting supplies from hospitals. The legal implications alone were staggering: license revocation, criminal charges, years in prison. As I retreated, a sound behind me made me turn. A man stood blocking my path, his expression grave but not threatening. He was in his 60s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. Reynolds," he said quietly, "I think it's time you and I had a conversation before you go any further." He knew my name. Whatever operation my wife was running, they had been aware of me all along. "Dr. Harrington," I replied, recognizing him now. William Harrington, former chief of medicine at Norwood Memorial, forced into early retirement 3 years ago after conflicts with the hospital's corporate ownership. Rebecca had considered him a mentor. "Let's step outside," he suggested, gesturing toward a small office area set up near the entrance. "Rebecca needs to focus on her patient." I followed him, equal parts relieved and apprehensive to finally get answers. The office was Spartan but organized. A desk, filing cabinets, 2 chairs, and surprisingly sophisticated computer equipment. "She doesn't know I'm here," I said as the door closed behind us. "I assumed as much," Dr. Harrington replied, indicating I should sit. "Rebecca has gone to extraordinary lengths to keep you insulated from this, both for your protection and because she respects your position too much to compromise it." "My position?" "As CFO of Westlake. As someone whose career depends on maintaining regulatory compliance. As someone who's never shown any willingness to work outside established systems." The assessment stung, partly because it was accurate. I had built my reputation on operating within rules, finding efficiencies without breaking protocols. I was known as the executive who could make the numbers work without cutting ethical corners. "What exactly is my wife involved in, Dr. Harrington?" He studied me for a moment. "Do you remember 3 years ago when Cordant Healthcare acquired Norwood Memorial?" I nodded. It had been major news in Seattle's business community, a for-profit healthcare giant absorbing one of the last independent teaching hospitals in the region. Rebecca had been uncharacteristically quiet during the transition, though her position as research director had been secure. Within 6 months of the acquisition, Cordant implemented new protocols for resource allocation. Harrington continued. Transplants, advanced cancer treatments, experimental procedures, all suddenly subject to enhanced eligibility reviews. What that meant in practice was that patients without premium insurance, without documented citizenship, without significant financial resources were quietly moved down priority lists or declared ineligible altogether. "Cost containment measures," I said, recognizing the euphemism from my own industry. "Death panels," Harrington corrected sharply. I watched patients I'd been treating for years suddenly denied procedures that would have saved their lives, all because they didn't meet new criteria that had nothing to do with medical necessity and everything to do with profit margins. I shifted uncomfortably, aware that Westlake's own policies weren't entirely different. The pressures of healthcare economics spared few systems. When I objected, Harrington continued, I was offered early retirement with a generous package and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Most of my colleagues adapted to the new reality. A few resigned. Your wife did something else entirely. She built this, I said, gesturing to indicate the facility around us. She built a lifeline, he corrected, for patients who would otherwise die because profit margins matter more than their lives. By stealing medical supplies and operating without authorization, the CFO in me couldn't ignore the financial crimes potentially involved. By reclaiming what the system wastes, Harrington countered. Do you have any idea how many medical supplies are discarded because of administrative protocols rather than actual expiration? How many medications are destroyed because they've reached arbitrary dates rather than lost efficacy? How many patients die while perfectly good treatments are thrown away? Before I could respond, the door opened. Rebecca stood there, surgical cap still on, eyes widening in shock as she saw me. "Thomas," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I found your phone," I replied simply. Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, exactly, but resignation mixed with determination. She turned to Harrington. "How is she?" "Stable," Harrington replied. "Chun is closing now. He has it under control." Rebecca nodded, then looked back at me. "We should talk at home." "No," I said firmly. "We should talk here. I need to see everything, understand everything, before we leave this place." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, let me finish with my patient, and I'll show you what we've built." An hour later, Rebecca led me through what she called the Nightingale Network. Named, she explained, not just for the famous nurse but for the Nightingale's reputation as a creature that sings in darkness. The warehouse operation was just one node in a sophisticated underground medical system that stretched across the Pacific Northwest. They had 3 such facilities, this one for surgical procedures, another disguised as a wellness center for ongoing treatments, and a third near the Canadian border for international patients. 28 medical professionals were involved, all still maintaining their regular hospital positions while volunteering here. Supply chains had been established through a complex system of reclamation from hospital waste streams, diverted expired medications that were still effective, and carefully managed inventory errors that Rebecca insisted never took supplies from patients within the legitimate system. "The young woman tonight," Rebecca explained as we stood in a recovery area where the patient now rested connected to monitoring equipment, "is Maria Delgado, 24, physics graduate student at UW. 3 years ago, she received a kidney transplant at Norwood. She was covered under her student insurance. 2 months ago, administrative issues caused a lapse in her coverage. When she developed signs of rejection, Cordant classified her as insurance pending and denied the anti-rejection protocol that would save her kidney. By the time her insurance was reinstated," Dr. Chun added, joining us, "the rejection had advanced to a stage Cordant deemed inefficient to treat. They recommended dialysis and put her at the bottom of the transplant list. Knowing her status as a non-citizen would effectively mean she'd never receive another kidney. Tonight, we administered the anti-rejection protocol that Cordant denied her," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the quiet intensity I'd always admired. "If it works, she keeps her kidney and returns to her studies. The cost to us was approximately $14,000 in medications and supplies that would otherwise have been destroyed. The cost to the legitimate system? Absolutely nothing." I looked at the young woman, her breathing now steady, color returning to her face. "And the messages about identity packages? Documentation? Many patients need follow-up care they can't access without identification," Rebecca explained. "We have people who help with that, creating records that allow them to receive ongoing care within the system." "That's fraud," I said reflexively. "That's survival," she shot back, echoing her colleague's intensity. "Tonight, we didn't just save Maria's kidney. We saved a physicist who's developing new radiation detection methods that could revolutionize early cancer screening. The system was willing to discard her because of paperwork. We weren't." I fell silent, the moral calculus suddenly more complex than the legal one. We moved to a small break room where other staff members were quietly celebrating the successful procedure. I recognized several faces from hospital fundraisers and medical community events, respected professionals all now revealed as conspirators in what was undeniably a criminal enterprise, no matter how noble its intentions. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked when we were alone again, the personal betrayal still raw beneath the larger ethical questions. Rebecca's expression softened. Because you've built your career on following rules, Thomas. Your position at Westlake requires regulatory compliance. Your professional reputation is built on finding legitimate solutions to financial challenges. She reached for my hand across the table. And because I love you too much to put you in an impossible position, having to choose between reporting your wife and becoming complicit in something that violates everything your career stands for. You made the choice for me instead. Yes, she acknowledged without apology. And I'd make it again. We were interrupted by Dr. Harrington, who entered with a concerned expression. Rebecca, we have a situation. Eric just called. There's been a compliance audit initiated at Swedish. They're reviewing blood product distributions for the past 6 months. Rebecca's posture changed instantly, the momentary vulnerability replaced by decisive focus. Potential exposure? Minimal if he purges the records tonight, but he's concerned about patterns being detected. He thinks someone may have reported discrepancies. Move to Protocol 4 for blood products, she said after a moment's thought. No more diversions from Swedish for at least 2 months. Contact our Portland connection and see if they can increase shipments. That's across state lines, Harrington noted with concern. Federal jurisdiction. We don't have a choice. We have 3 patients who will need transfusions next week. I watched this exchange with growing understanding of the operation's complexity and its vulnerabilities. My professional experience highlighted the weak points immediately. Your supply chain is your greatest exposure, I said quietly. Both turned to look at me in surprise. Blood products are heavily regulated and tracked. If someone's noticed discrepancies at Swedish, other hospitals will increase scrutiny. Pattern recognition software will identify similar anomalies across the region. Rebecca studied me carefully. What would you suggest? I hesitated on the precipice of a decision I never thought I'd face, becoming actively complicit in a criminal conspiracy, even one with noble intentions. If I were trying to solve this problem legally, I said slowly, I'd create a legitimate front organization, a research institute or specialized treatment center that could legally receive donated medical supplies and blood products. The paperwork would be complex but manageable. And if you were solving it our way? Rebecca asked, watching me intently. I took a deep breath. I'd establish multiple small-scale collection points rather than diverting from major hospitals. Surgery centers, outpatient facilities, places with less sophisticated tracking and smaller staffs who might be sympathetic to misclassifying certain items as disposed when they're actually diverted. Harrington's eyebrows raised. That's actually brilliant. Lower volumes from more sources would create less detectable patterns. It would require more people involved, I cautioned. More potential security breaches. But less risk of catastrophic discovery, Rebecca noted. She reached for my hand again. Thomas, I never expected this from you. I never expected this from you either, I replied honestly. 17 years, Rebecca? I thought I knew every aspect of who you are. You knew the part of me that could function within the system, she said quietly. This is the part that couldn't stand by while that system let people die unnecessarily. Dawn began to lighten the sky outside the warehouse windows. We've been talking all night, complexity upon complexity revealing itself. The Nightingale Network wasn't just about treating a few desperate patients, it was a systematic response to what my wife and her colleagues saw as systematic failure. They had built parallel structures for everything from patient identification to follow-up care, from supply acquisition to medical record maintenance. What happens now? Rebecca finally asked as we sat in her makeshift office, examining financial records that showed both the operation's ingenuity and its vulnerabilities. It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. Report her? Support her? Demand she stop? Pretend I never saw the phone? I need time, I said finally. This is enormous, Rebecca. The legal implications alone. I understand, she said, reaching for her surgical bag. I've kept this from you for 2 years. I can't expect you to process it in a single night. When we arrived home, the morning sun illuminated our perfectly ordered life, the house that represented our success, the carefully chosen artwork, the matched furniture that spoke of tasteful affluence. It all looked different now, like a stage set rather than a home. "I'll take a shower," Rebecca said quietly. "Then I should try to get some sleep before my shift." I nodded, watching her climb the stairs. My wife, physician, criminal, humanitarian. Which identity was real? Or were they all facets of a woman more complex than I'd allowed myself to see? In my home office, I stared at the burner phone still connected to my laptop. I could end this now. One call to regulatory authorities would dismantle the entire operation. Lives would be disrupted, careers ended, possibly freedoms lost. But other lives, like Maria Delgado's, would certainly be ended by that same decision. I thought of my own work at Westlake, the countless meetings where we discussed resource optimization and service rationalization, corporate euphemisms for decisions that determined who received care and who didn't. I'd always told myself we were making the best possible choices within necessary constraints. Had I been complicit in my own way all along? 3 days later, having barely spoken to Rebecca beyond necessary courtesies, I made my decision. I found her in our kitchen, reviewing patient files at the island counter as she had countless times before. "I've reviewed your financial structure," I said without preamble. "You're vulnerable in at least 7 areas I've identified. Your supply chain leaves patterns that any sophisticated analysis would detect. Your banking practices would trigger anti-money laundering algorithms if anyone looked closely. And your communication security is amateur at best." She looked up, surprise and wariness in her expression. "What are you saying, Thomas?" "I'm saying you need a professional CFO. Someone who understands healthcare finance well enough to make discrepancies disappear. Someone who can build systems that won't trigger regulatory algorithms. Thomas, I can't ask you to risk your career. Your freedom." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You didn't ask," I replied, setting a flash drive on the counter between us. "This contains a complete restructuring plan for the Nightingale Network's financial operations. Improved supply chain concealment, better banking protocols, enhanced communication security. I've been working on it since I came home from the warehouse." She stared at the flash drive, then back at me. "Why?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "Because in 17 years of marriage, I've never seen you do anything without a moral certainty that it was right. Because I've spent my career telling myself that working within the system was the ethical choice, when perhaps it was just the easier one. And because that young woman deserves to live, regardless of what some insurance algorithm says about her value." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, something so rare I could count the occurrences on one hand across our marriage. "I never meant to put you in this position." "I know," I said, moving around the counter to take her hands. "But now that I am, we face it together. Professional to the end, remember?" That night marked the beginning of our new shared life, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in a mission larger than ourselves. I maintained my position at Westlake, now using my insider knowledge to better protect the shadow operation. I restructured their financial systems, created better supply chain camouflage, established more secure communication protocols. 3 months later, we moved the operation from the warehouse to a decommissioned urgent care facility I helped acquire through a complex web of shell companies. I negotiated discreet arrangements with medical suppliers who asked no questions. Rebecca expanded the treatment capabilities, bringing on specialists who worked 1 day a month off the books. Our dinner conversations became strategy sessions. The moral compromises accumulated, but so did the lives saved. 200 patients in the first year since I joined. 400 in the second. Each one a person the legitimate system had deemed unworthy of the resources required to save them. I hadn't realized how fulfilling this shadow work would become, using my financial expertise not just to balance books but to directly impact lives. For the first time, the abstract numbers in my spreadsheets had names and faces. Maria Delgado completed her physics program and now researches early cancer detection methods. Jorge Mendez returned to his construction job and supports 5 children. Sarah Williams received the treatment her insurance denied and now advocates for healthcare reform. Then came the call that changed everything again. A Tuesday night, just as we were preparing for bed. Rebecca's burner phone, now equipped with state-of-the-art encryption thanks to my connections, buzzed with an urgent message. "Fisher's been arrested," she said, face pale as she read the screen. "Federal agents took him into custody an hour ago." Dr. Andrew Fisher was our connection at Pacific Northwest Medical Center, responsible for reclassifying surplus medications for diversion to our network. "What are they charging him with?" I asked, immediately calculating exposure. "Unclear. The message just says it's related to inventory discrepancies. Could be our operation, could be something else entirely." The next 24 hours were a blur of emergency protocols. Secure communications purged, supply chains frozen, patients transferred to safe locations. I activated the contingency plans I developed, shutting down financial pathways that could be traced. Then, at 4:30 a.m. on Thursday, federal agents from the Department of Health and Human Services surrounded our house. Someone had connected the dots not through our financial records or supply chain, but through patient outcomes. Too many people who should have died were mysteriously surviving. As they led Rebecca away in handcuffs, she looked back at me where I stood in our doorway, watching the dismantling of our shared purpose. "I don't regret any of it," she said clearly, making sure the agents heard. "Not a single life saved." The lead agent turned to me. "Mr. Reynolds, we have some questions about financial transactions associated with these activities." "I'll cooperate fully," I replied, the CFO mask sliding automatically into place. After I contact my attorney, the federal cars drove away with my wife inside. I closed the door on the curious neighbors gathering on our perfect street and immediately activated our final contingency plan, Operation Phoenix, designed for exactly this scenario. Within hours, our network of physicians had relocated critical patients to backup facilities. Digital records were transferred to servers beyond federal jurisdiction. Our most vulnerable team members were on flights to various destinations with new identities and resources to rebuild elsewhere. 3 days later, I visited Rebecca at the Federal Detention Center. Across the table, she looked smaller in the standard-issue jumpsuit, but her eyes held the same determination I'd first fallen in love with decades ago. "They found the main facility and 2 satellite operations," she said quietly. "But Phoenix activated perfectly. Dr. Chun reports all critical patients were transferred successfully." I nodded, relief washing through me. "The financial traces are being eliminated as we speak. They'll find shell companies that lead nowhere. They'll come for you next," she said, reaching across to take my hand. "The financial structures are too sophisticated for them to believe I created them. You should distance yourself now. Claim ignorance." I shook my head. "Professional to the end. Remember? We built this together." "Thomas," she said, voice breaking slightly, "I can handle prison. I've made my peace with that possibility years ago. But both of us? Everything we've built, everything we've saved, will continue," I assured her. "The network is bigger than us now. Others will carry it forward while we fight this battle." As I left the detention center, my secure phone buzzed with a message, "Phoenix Phase 2 complete. Operations resuming under new structure. Awaiting instructions." Somewhere across Seattle, the network we'd built was adapting, surviving, transforming. Just like the patients it served. And despite the legal battles ahead, I felt something unexpected: pride. Not in breaking the law, but in finally understanding that justice and legality were not always the same thing. 6 months later, Rebecca and I sat in a federal courtroom as our attorneys presented the defense we'd carefully constructed. Not a denial of the facts, the evidence was too substantial for that, but a challenge to the system that had made our actions necessary. The defendants, our lead attorney argued, created a parallel system only because the official one abandoned its fundamental purpose, healing the sick regardless of their economic value. When medicine becomes merely a business, physicians must choose between their professional oath and institutional policy. Dr. Reynolds chose her oath. The prosecution countered with regulations, statutes, and the dangers of physicians operating outside established protocols. Both arguments had merit. Both missed the larger truth that Rebecca whispered to me as we awaited the verdict. Whatever happens next, we showed what's possible. The network continues without us. The model has spread to Chicago, to Atlanta, to Denver. This was never about just us. My wife's secret phone had indeed contained messages worse than an affair. They revealed a moral compromise more profound than infidelity. But they also revealed something else, courage I hadn't known existed, compassion I hadn't practiced myself, and ultimately a purpose larger than the comfortable life we'd built. As the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict that would determine our future, I reached for Rebecca's hand. Whatever sentence awaited us, we had already received something more valuable than freedom, the knowledge that some rules must be broken for humanity to advance, and the certainty that breaking them together had made our marriage stronger than 17 years of comfortable compliance ever could. Sometimes the worst secrets reveal the best truths about ourselves. And sometimes, discovering who your partner really is means discovering who you might become if you find the courage to step beyond the boundaries you've accepted without question. The verdict would determine our legal fate. But the true judgment, whether our actions had been worthy of the risks we'd taken, had already been rendered in the lives of hundreds who continued to breathe because we had chosen defiance over compliance. Professional to the end, but now serving a higher standard than any regulatory body could define.